What if everything we thought about getting older was, well, completely upside down?
Hmm.
What if the path to true calm, to real inner peace and this undeniable sense of freedom, what if it didn't come from avoiding life's difficulties, but actually required the messy, complicated, often painful journey of living?
That's a powerful thought, isn't it? It flips the script.
It really does. And today we're taking a deep dive into exactly that idea. That the march of time, far from just bringing wrinkles and limitations, might actually unlock this remarkable state of inner liberation.
Indeed. We're exploring the profound wisdom that can accumulate with age, leading to this unique sense of calm and freedom, something suggested by, well, one of history's great thinkers, Plato.
Right, and as you said, this isn't about the physical stuff, the decline we often focus on.
Not at all. It's an internal transformation, a fundamental shift in how we perceive and uh, interact with the world around us.
And to really get into this, we've pulled together a pretty eclectic mix of sources, but they're all deeply insightful, I think.
It's quite a range.
We'll be drawing from the foundational wisdom of ancient philosophers like Plato, naturally, and Confucius. We'll dig into the really personal, intense revelations from figures like Leo Tolstoy.
His story is quite something.
Absolutely. And then we're even extracting some maybe surprising tactical wisdom from people like Alfred Hitchcock.
Ah, the master of suspense, applying it to life.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Exactly. And the motivational brilliance of Les Brown. Plus, we've got profound observations from Martin Luther King Jr. and even the sharp wit of Mark Twain.
Wow, okay. So it's quite a tapestry of thought we're weaving together here.
It is. And our mission today, for you listening in, isn't just to understand what these great minds observed about aging. It's really about extracting actionable wisdom from all these diverse perspectives.
Right. This isn't just theory about later life. The goal is finding insights you can apply right now, whatever stage you're at, to start cultivating this very calm and freedom.
Yeah, we want to understand how this inner liberation happens. What are the internal shifts? What are the learned behaviors involved?
And crucially, how can you start integrating them today? That's the real takeaway we're aiming for.
Okay, let's get started then. Let's unpack this core idea. We're starting with Plato, who offers this truly profound and, like you said, maybe counterintuitive statement. Old age has a great sense of calm and freedom.
Hmm.
Now, for many of us, that probably sounds surprising, maybe even a bit jarring. We're so often conditioned, aren't we, to associate aging with loss.
Loss of youth, loss of vitality, maybe independence.
Exactly. Or the fading of dreams, that kind of thing. But Plato's suggesting something radically different here, something much, much deeper than just, slowing down or having fewer responsibilities.
And what's truly remarkable, I think, is that Plato isn't suggesting that life just gets easier on the outside as you age.
Right, it's not like your problems magically vanish.
No, not at all. He's pointing to a profound internal shift, a liberation from the anxieties, the impulsive desires, the emotional compulsions that, let's face it, often define our younger years.
So it's an inner transformation, a fundamental change in how we relate to the world and to ourselves.
Imagine the freedom in that, being
Yeah.
less tied to those everyday urgencies and reactions.
Totally. I mean, when you're younger especially, the world can feel like this relentless onslaught of external pressures. Just think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Building a career, navigating complicated relationships, trying to get financially secure, striving for social approval, even just figuring out who you are fundamentally.
It all feels so incredibly urgent, monumental almost.
Exactly, paramount to your existence.
Yeah.
So the very idea of calm and freedom later in life might seem completely at odds with that experience. It implies a detachment from the very things that seem to dictate our happiness and worth early on.
Which naturally leads us to the big question. How does one actually earn that kind of profound calm?
Right, it's not automatic.
It's definitely not. It's abundantly clear from the sources we're looking at that this isn't some passive state, a gift automatically handed out just because you've had more birthdays.
No, it seems like it's a deeply cultivated capacity, something forged through lived experience, and quite often forged through the very struggles and discomforts we try so hard to avoid when we're younger.
It's a wisdom that is, in many ways, hard-won, earned, not given.
Okay, so this brings us to a part of the journey that, well, it can be a bit uncomfortable to talk about, maybe, but it's where the insights get really transformative. We need to understand the profound power of suffering.
And Leo Tolstoy's personal story is just such a powerful illustration of this.
It really is. He describes this period of profound unhappiness, feeling utterly trapped. He actually says, "Before, I lived in sin. I knew I was unhappy and I suffered. I didn't see any way out of this situation except for suicide or death. Life seemed terrible to me." That's incredibly raw.
It is. And the key here is that his transformation wasn't about his external problems suddenly just vanishing.
No, it wasn't about the circumstances changing.
Not at all. It was a complete transformation of his relationship to those problems.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about this pivotal moment, saying he heard the words of Christ, and I understood them. And life ceased to seem an evil, and instead of desperation, I felt a happiness for life which surpasses even death.
Wow.
Now, you could look at that just as a religious conversion, but it seems deeper, right?
Mm.
It was the development of a completely new framework for interpreting and understanding his suffering.
So the same circumstances that once seemed unbearable that paralyzed him.
Exactly. They became bearable, even meaningful, when he looked at them through this new, expanded lens. He fundamentally reframed his entire existence.
And it's easy to see why a younger person might really struggle with that concept.
Oh, absolutely.
When you're young, every pain, every setback, every disappointment can feel, well, absolute, overwhelming, utterly inescapable almost.
You haven't lived through enough cycles yet.
Right. You haven't accumulated enough life experience, enough rounds of difficulty followed by recovery to intuitively grasp that truth, that this too shall pass.
You just lack the perspective, that deep experiential database, as you put it earlier.
Yeah. You can't yet understand that pain, while it's undeniably real and incredibly hard in the moment, is often temporary. And more than that, it can actually be a powerful catalyst for growth, for profound change.
It's like trying to explain, I don't know, the full richness of a symphony to someone who's only ever heard a single note. Until you've felt that full spectrum of experience, the ups and the downs, it's just an abstract idea.
Looking at this from a wider angle then, Tolstoy's journey really drives home this idea that suffering isn't just something to be avoided at all costs.
No, it can actually function as a profound curriculum for growth. His later insight really captures this mature approach perfectly. He said, "When you suffer, think not on how you can escape suffering, but concentrate your efforts on what kind of inner moral and spiritual perfection this suffering requires."
Wow, that's a profoundly sophisticated way to look at it, and very counterintuitive.
It really is. Instead of that natural human impulse, to just eliminate the discomfort, distract ourselves, run away.
Yeah, just make it stop.
Right. The mature perspective asks something different. It asks, okay, what qualities is this difficulty trying to develop in me? What does this tough moment demand of my inner self, my character? What can I learn here?
That redirection of effort, that shift is fundamental. It's truly liberating, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It pivots you from a place of resistance, of fighting it, to one of curiosity, from desperately wanting to escape to being willing to learn.
And that curiosity, that willingness, even if it's reluctant at first, to lean into the discomfort and look for its deeper meaning, that directly contributes to the calm Plato talks about.
How so?
Well, it's the calm of knowing that nothing is truly wasted, that even pain, even suffering, has a purpose if you look for it. It becomes potential energy for growth.
Okay, that makes sense. So if suffering can be this curriculum, what specific kind of wisdom actually emerges from navigating that sort of darkness?
Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "Only in the darkness can you see the stars," speaks so powerfully to this.
Beautiful quote.
Isn't it? When you've genuinely endured profound darkness, whether that's personal loss, maybe a major career failure, crushing disappointment, deep despair, you cultivate a unique kind of night vision.
Night vision, I like that.
Yeah, you learn to perceive beauty, meaning profound insights that are simply invisible to those who have only known the daylight. Easier circumstances. You start to see the glimmer of possibility, the constellations of resilience in moments where others might only see pitch blackness.
And that's not pessimism at all. It's actually a deep, profound realism, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the hard-won recognition that life's most profound gifts, its most valuable insights, maybe its deepest sense of empathy, often emerge from its most challenging, its darkest circumstances.
You develop this intimate appreciation for the sheer resilience of the human spirit, including your own resilience.
Yes, and you begin to see genuine gifts emerging from situations that others might just label as purely tragic or insurmountable. This perspective becomes a fundamental bedrock for the calm we're discussing.
It's the calm that comes from understanding that even in the absolute toughest moments, there's always something to be learned, something to be gained, a hidden star to be discovered. if you just have the eyes, that night vision, to see it.
And this internal shift, it transforms difficulty from feeling like a dead end into seeing it as a potential pathway.
Yeah.
It's the calm of knowing that your capacity for understanding, for resilience, actually expands with every challenge you overcome.
Hmm.
You build this reservoir of inner strength that external events just can't deplete anymore.
Okay, so suffering can be a curriculum. How then does our actual approach to learning, to gaining wisdom, shift over a lifetime? Confucius gives us a really powerful roadmap here, doesn't he, that highlights this evolution.
He does. He identifies three distinct paths to understanding wisdom.
Right. First, meditation, which he calls the most noble way.
Mm-hmm.
Second, by influence or following someone, which he says is the easiest way.
The path of imitation, essentially.
Yeah. And third, the path of experience, which he very candidly labels the most difficult way.
And when you look at how these paths play out across different life stages, the distinctions become crystal clear.
How so?
Well, when we're young, we rely heavily, almost exclusively, on those second and third paths, right?
Following others and bumping into things.
Pretty much. We learn by emulating our parents, teachers, mentors, or just following the scripts society gives us. And we learn, maybe most powerfully, through direct, often painful experience, trial and error, facing the consequences of our actions.
So the young person hasn't really developed the capacity for that sustained, deep reflection that makes Confucius's meditation path truly fruitful yet.
Generally, no. Their understanding mostly comes from outside sources and from, like you said, bumping up against the often harsh realities of the world. They're still busy accumulating the raw data.
But then on the accumulation of years, something fundamental shifts.
Exactly. The older person has, just by living, gathered this truly vast store of experiences to reflect upon. They've seen patterns repeat themselves over decades.
They've watched the long-term consequences of different approaches play out.
They've witnessed the unpredictable twists and turns of countless human stories. It's not just more data points. This provides the rich, raw material for genuine meditation.
Ah, so that's the connection. The ability to extract enduring wisdom, universal truths from that lived experience, rather than just keep accumulating more experiences without really understanding them.
Precisely. It's like having this huge internal library of personal case studies to draw insights from.
And that accumulated experiential database, as we called it, allows for that true meditation, extracting deeper meaning from the past.
And when we connect this back to Plato's calm, it becomes clear why that calm isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about understanding their inherent nature, recognizing how they fit into broader recurring patterns.
So the seasoned individual doesn't need to react quite so intensely to every new situation.
Often, no, because they can frequently recognize it as a variation on familiar themes they've encountered before. They've seen how most crises, given time and effort, tend to resolve.
How most fears, when you really look at them, prove unfounded.
Right. And how most losses eventually can reveal unexpected gifts or lead to new, maybe even better pathways.
That pattern recognition, that's really key, isn't it?
It is. It cultivates a natural equanimity, a kind of balanced state of mind that younger people, simply lacking that deep historical database of their own life, can't easily access yet. It's the calm of deep understanding, the serenity that comes from knowing the cyclical nature of things, not the calm of just inaction or ignorance.
And this understanding, you're saying, directly supports Plato's idea of freedom, too.
I think it does, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about it. Young people are often, quite literally, kind of enslaved by their immediate reactions and impulses.
Like what?
Well, that desperate need for social approval, the intense craving for immediate pleasures, the paralyzing fears about an uncertain future, the constant pull of comparing yourself to others.
Okay, yeah, those are powerful forces.
Immensely powerful. But the person who has lived long enough to witness these patterns play out, to see their often fleeting nature and the real cost of being driven by them, they learn to hold those forces much more lightly.
They're free not because the pressures disappear.
Exactly. But because they are less compelled, less dictated by forces that once seemed absolutely irresistible, forces that drove so much of their behavior earlier on, they can actually choose their responses with greater intention and awareness.
Okay, this leads to a really compelling question then. How does this profound understanding, this cultivated calm, how does it actually translate into practical power, into effective influence in the world?
That's a great question, because we often think of wisdom as something maybe reflective, even passive.
Right, sitting on a mountaintop somewhere?
Exactly. But these sources reveal it to be incredibly active, a potent force in actually shaping outcomes. The subtle art of influence and patience, as shown in some of our sources, is a perfect example of this wisdom in action. It really shows how mature power is wielded differently.
This is where it gets really interesting for, like, practical application in our own lives. Alfred Hitchcock's legendary approach to getting creative control of his films. On the surface, it might seem cunning, maybe even manipulative.
You could see it that way initially.
But when you look closer, it actually highlights this deep, almost empathetic wisdom about human nature. It's the absolute opposite of just forcing things, isn't it?
It really is.
The source notes he moved slowly, starting out by giving the writer room to work loosely off his notes, then asking for revisions that shaped the script his way. His control only became obvious gradually, and by that time the writer was emotionally tied to the project.
Right, and if we look at this from a broader perspective, it's about understanding that sustainable influence, the kind that lasts, isn't usually achieved by exerting immediate overt force or making aggressive demands.
Like a younger person might try to do, get results now.
Exactly. A younger person, often driven by that need for immediate results, might attempt to force outcomes through overt manipulation and power grabs, which, as the source rightly points out, very frequently just creates envy and resentment. People naturally resist being overtly controlled.
Yeah, nobody likes feeling like a pawn in someone else's game. You don't want to be told what to do or feel like you're being managed or pushed around.
Precisely. But the mature approach, the Hitchcock approach, understands that people are far more likely to embrace conclusions, solutions, ideas if they feel they arrived at them themselves, or were at least gently guided towards them through a process that felt like collaboration.
It's about the profound power of patience and indirection. Not trickery, but a deep insight into how people actually work.
Exactly. It represents this fundamental difference in how power is conceived and wielded. It's a patient approach, often born from that deep well of experience, and it connects directly back to Plato's freedom.
How so?
Well, the truly free person doesn't feel that urgent need to control everything immediately, because they have this profound understanding of how influence actually works over the long haul. They are liberated from the compulsion to force outcomes right now.
And that freedom, paradoxically, makes them more effective.
Often, yes.
Hmm.
Far more effective at subtly shaping those outcomes in the long run.
It reminds me of the difference between, say, a young parent trying to control a rebellious teenager with rigid rules and punishments.
Which often just backfires, creates more rebellion.
Right, versus a more mature parent who draws on years of observing human nature, the long arc of consequences, and might instead skillfully create conditions where the teenager kind of discovers the desired truth or lessons for themselves.
That's a great analogy. It isn't manipulation in a negative, self-serving way. It's a profound wisdom about how human beings actually change, how they grow, how they're most effectively guided towards their own best interests. It's planting seeds and tending the soil, rather than trying to force a bloom overnight.
So this raises another important question for our own lives. How does this patient, maybe indirect approach also apply to our own internal state, to our personal development?
Well, the key insight here is that the individual who possesses that platonic calm and freedom doesn't need to win every single battle immediately, whether it's internal or external. They learn to make time their ally.
Make time their ally.
Because they understand that sustainable victories, whether we're talking about character development, learning a skill, or influencing others, they unfold gradually. This deep patience itself becomes a formidable kind of power.
A power that younger people, often driven by that urgency and need for immediate results, rarely have the capacity to access.
Exactly. It's the confidence that comes from knowing the harvest eventually arrives, if you just keep patiently tending the field.
Okay, so if patience is a form of power, what does this all mean for how we actually actively build character and ultimately achieve our goals? We often operate under this assumption, don't we, that we need to feel motivated first.
Right. Wait for the mood to strike.
Yeah. Or that being a certain way, like being generous or disciplined, is all about having some grand intention or waiting for a sudden surge of inspiration.
But these sources are telling us something quite different, something profoundly practical about how we actually build character and get things done.
Yeah.
They essentially say, if you want to be a generous person, become a generous person through generous actions. Just do it.
Act first, feel later.
In a sense, yes. This is a very practical and I think profoundly empowering piece of wisdom. If you look at the bigger picture, it's about understanding this deep, often counterintuitive feedback loop between our actions and our internal states.
Whereas younger people often focus intensely on who they want to become, planning it all out.
Exactly, creating elaborate self-improvement plans, grand identity projects, which is fine, but the mature individual has learned, often through countless attempts, that character truly emerges from consistent patterns of behavior over time,
Not just intention.
not just intention.
Yeah.
They understand, and modern neuroscience increasingly backs this up, that our actions literally shape our neural pathways, which in turn shape our automatic responses, our habits, and ultimately our character. You don't become courageous by just wanting to be. You become courageous by acting courageously, again and again, even when you're feeling afraid.
And this really flips a common, often paralyzing assumption, doesn't it? We think motivation has to come before the action. We wait to feel inspired or ready.
We do. But often it's precisely the other way around. The practical observation honed by years of living is basically mental focus follows physical focus. When feeling unmotivated, first change behavior. Then thoughts and perceptions can change. Mood follows action.
Mood follows action. That's powerful.
It is. This insight moves beyond relying on sheer willpower to recognizing how consistency in action fundamentally shapes who we become. It's a lesson often learned the hard way, through decades of trying and failing to just wait for inspiration to strike.
So the older, wiser person has typically learned this through countless real-world trials.
Often, yes, they've discovered that waiting to feel like exercising or being generous or tackling that difficult project, it's often a losing game. Instead, they've learned the profound power of simply starting.
Just beginning.
Just beginning with small, manageable actions. That then creates momentum, and then, almost magically sometimes, it shifts their internal state, their mood, their motivation follows.
And this knowledge gives you tremendous freedom from those emotional storms that can paralyze younger people. That feeling of being stuck, waiting for the perfect conditions.
Absolutely. Freedom from emotional paralysis. And Les Brown really brings this truth home with a challenging but incredibly liberating statement. He says, "You must be willing to do today what others won't do, to have tomorrow what others won't have."
Now, a younger person might hear that and think it means heroic, one-off efforts, grand, exhausting sacrifices.
Right. But the mature person often understands it differently. They hear it as a profound recognition that small, consistent actions undertaken day after day, year after year, they compound over time.
The compound effect.
Exactly, in ways that create truly extraordinary, almost unimaginable results down the line. It's a powerful insight into the nature of long-term success and inner contentment.
So they're liberated from that desperate need for immediate gratification.
Largely, yes. Because they have firsthand experience, they've seen how patient accumulation works across a lifetime. They've seen how a few dollars saved each week can become a significant sum over decades. How a few minutes spent learning a skill each day leads to mastery. How consistent small acts of kindness build an unbreakable network of support.
And this patience, this foresight, is directly connected to the calm and freedom Plato was talking
I
about.
believe so. Which raises another important question. What about risk? How does this deep wisdom change our relationship with risk and with the very idea of what constitutes true security?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting again. And again, maybe delightfully counterintuitive. Les Brown's insight about risk reveals another profound dimension of how age can forge that calm and freedom. He says, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm,
Powerful line.
isn't it? And then he continues, if you are not willing to risk, you cannot grow. If you cannot grow, you cannot be your best. If you cannot be your best, you cannot be happy. If you cannot be happy, then what else is there?
Wow, that connects risk directly to happiness.
It does. And this idea of the enemy within is so incredibly powerful. It completely flips our usual understanding of security on its head, doesn't it? It suggests security isn't about avoiding challenges or dangers.
But almost inviting them, or at least not fearing them unduly, seeing them as necessary for growth.
Yes. Looking at this from a broader perspective, it's about shifting away from that perpetually defensive, fear-driven posture towards life's inherent uncertainties.
Whereas an adaptive, resilient, and ultimately more confident stance.
Right. This passage identifies a crucial paradox. True security doesn't come from avoiding risk at all costs, building impenetrable walls around yourself.
No, it comes from developing the robust internal resources, the inner fortitude, to actually handle whatever life throws your way.
Which is different from how younger people often approach it. They expend immense energy seeking external security, right?
Absolutely. The perfect job, the ideal relationship, the stable financial situation, the safest neighborhood. Believing these external pillars will provide the unshakable safety they crave,
But the mature person has learned through lived experience, often the hard way.
that external circumstances are inherently unstable. They will change. They always change.
Jobs are lost, relationships evolve or end, markets crash, health fluctuates. It's the nature of life.
Exactly.
Mm.
So real security, then, doesn't come from those shifting external sands. It comes from the unwavering inner knowledge that you can adapt, that you can learn from setbacks, that you possess the resilience to recover and rebuild no matter what happens around you.
It's an internal locus of control, fundamentally.
Precisely. And this cultivates a fundamentally different, and I'd argue far healthier, relationship to risk.
How so?
While the younger person, often fearing failure, judgment, catastrophic loss, might avoid taking necessary risks. For them, a setback can feel like the end of the world, a permanent mark against them.
But the older individual, having survived multiple failures, disappointments, even profound losses,
They often understand that these experiences are not only survivable, but frequently more valuable, more instructive than decades of unblemished success. They've learned from the mistakes.
so they're free to take calculated risks.
Yes, not because they're reckless or indifferent to the consequences, but because they know, deep down in their bones, that they can handle those consequences. They know a failure isn't a final verdict on their worth, but a powerful, if sometimes painful, teacher.
That's the ultimate confidence, isn't it? Knowing that you are your own greatest asset, your own safety net.
It really is. And Pia Nilsson and Lynn Marriott's observation speaks directly to this internal power. You can choose to play frustrated and afraid, or focused and engaged.
Now, a younger person might read that as just, motivational fluff. Choose to be positive, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right. But the mature individual recognizes it differently. They see it as a description of a profoundly learned skill, a capacity forged over time through navigating countless challenges.
They've discovered, through the crucible of experience.
Exactly. That their response to circumstances truly matters far more than the circumstances themselves. This hard-won knowledge provides tremendous calm because it firmly locates power where it actually resides squarely within their own choices, their internal state.
Rather than in external events, which are so often completely beyond their control.
And this fundamental change in perspective about risk, about where real security lies, it's a cornerstone of the freedom Plato speaks of. Because external events gradually lose their power to define your internal state or dictate your emotional well-being.
Which naturally leads us to think about how this accumulated wisdom also changes our relationship to other people and even to time itself.
Right. How does it affect comparison? How does it affect our focus on the future versus the present?
Okay, so what does this all mean when we look at how we compare ourselves to others and how we relate to the very passage of time? Mark Twain's quote is just so witty, but it also points to a truly profound shift. Few things are harder to put up with than the annoyance of a good example.
Huh? It's brilliant, isn't it? And from a broader perspective, these insights we're discussing really highlight the profound liberation that comes from detaching our sense of self-worth from those endless external comparisons.
And detaching our happiness from rigid, predetermined future outcomes.
Exactly. The mature person, having observed the vast, varied tapestry of human lives, has generally learned to be far less threatened by other people's excellence or accomplishments.
Why is that?
Because they understand that human abilities, talents, successes, they develop along vastly different timelines and through myriad, often unpredictable paths.
That's a huge psychological shift from youth, isn't it?
Oh, massive. When you're younger, it's almost a natural tendency, maybe even biologically wired, for someone else's success to feel like a direct, often painful reflection of your own inadequacy or lack.
It fuels envy, or that horrible feeling of falling behind.
It really can. But the older person has seen enough human stories unfold, enough lives play out over the long term, to recognize that apparent advantages and disadvantages often reverse or transmute over time.
Like the high school star may be struggling later while the awkward kid blossoms.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
quarterback might struggle in business. The introverted teen might become a brilliant scientist. This lived perspective provides tremendous freedom from the constant exhausting grind of comparison and competition that so often characterizes younger years. You are finally free to just run your own race at your own pace.
And Seneca's timeless wisdom about enjoying the present, that also becomes more accessible with age, you think, for similar reasons.
I think so, absolutely. He advises, true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future.
For a lot of young people, that can feel almost impossible. Something you might only truly grasp after a lifetime of trying and mostly failing to perfectly control the future.
Right, because the young person by their very nature is intensely focused on the future. So much of their identity, their security, their hopes and dreams depend on what they might become or achieve tomorrow.
But the older person has learned through repeated experience.
That the future rarely, if ever, unfolds exactly as planned.
No.
They've seen countless plans change, countless dreams morph into something unexpected, countless detours leading to unanticipated, sometimes even better, destinations.
And this hard-won understanding teaches them that present moment awareness, fully engaging with what's happening right now, often provides far more deep, lasting satisfaction than constantly planning for or worrying about the future.
Often, yes. It doesn't mean abandoning goals or not planning for tomorrow, of course. That's not realistic or wise.
No, it's not about being passive.
Not at all. But it's about holding those activities, those future plans, much more lightly. The mature person can engage in a rigorous future-oriented thinking, diligent planning, without being enslaved by it,
Yeah.
without their emotional state being entirely dictated by uncertain outcomes down the road.
They can work enthusiastically towards goals while staying open.
Exactly. Remaining profoundly open to unexpected opportunities, sudden shifts in circumstances, beneficial changes in direction that they couldn't have predicted. It's about cultivating this deep trust in the unfolding of life itself.
A trust that often takes years, maybe decades, to truly cultivate.
It certainly seems that way. And this ultimately brings us right back to the very core of Plato's remarkable observation about calm and freedom.
So what does this all mean when we really try to bring it all together? It feels like it all circles back to this incredible, liberating idea.
That the ultimate calm and profound freedom, Plato described, isn't primarily about your external circumstances changing.
Right. Or your problems just disappearing somehow. Instead, it's about a fundamental internal shift in perspective itself.
Yes, it's a deep dive into the true, actionable meaning of wisdom. The older person isn't free because their problems have vanished, they likely still have plenty, but because they've developed a fundamentally different, far more resilient, and deeply profound relationship to problems themselves.
Exactly. When we connect all these threads, Plato's wisdom really does transcend mere age. It becomes a kind of blueprint, doesn't it? For a life lived with more intentionality, resilience, and deep understanding.
It does. They've learned through the school of hard knocks and maybe quiet observation that most crises, given time and effort, eventually resolve.
That most fears, when you really look them in the eye, prove unfounded.
And that most losses, while undeniably painful, eventually reveal unexpected gifts or open up new, previously unseen pathways. They understand, fundamentally,
That character develops through challenges, not despite them.
that true influence works far better through patient cultivation than through brute force.
And that genuine security comes from cultivating internal adaptability, not from vainly trying to control every single external, unpredictable variable.
In this perspective, this accumulated wisdom, it cultivates that natural, almost unshakable calm, precisely because it dramatically reduces the relentless urgency that drives so much youthful anxiety.
When you deeply know this too shall pass, when you truly understand that setbacks often become setups for remarkable comebacks.
When you've witnessed how life's apparent detours sometimes lead to even better destinations than your original rigid plans.
You can face current difficulties, whatever they are, with a truly remarkable sense of equanimity, inner peace, even amidst the storm.
And the freedom, then, stems from being profoundly less compelled by those often unconscious forces that typically drive so much human behavior.
Like the desperate need for external approval,
The paralyzing fear of failure,
the overwhelming compulsion to control every outcome.
the constant gnawing anxiety about the future.
These impulses don't necessarily vanish entirely, do they?
Probably not completely for most people, but experience teaches you how to hold them much more lightly. They no longer dictate your choices, hijack your emotions, or define your inner state to the same degree. You are liberated to act from a place of clarity and choice, not from compulsion.
So Plato's insight really is more than just an observation about old age. It's like a living roadmap for how to live a deeply fulfilling life.
I think so. And while this kind of profound wisdom often emerges more naturally for many with the accumulation of years,
The real gift here, the really exciting part, is that people of any age can begin cultivating this perspective today, right now.
absolutely, by consciously choosing to see challenges, not as punishments, but as invaluable opportunities for growth.
By practicing patience and maybe more indirect influence rather than always resorting to force.
By taking small, consistent actions rather than waiting for some magical surge of motivation.
And by holding future plans lightly while engaging fully and joyfully with present opportunities, we can all begin cultivating the calm and freedom that Plato saw emerging naturally with age.
This wisdom transforms difficulties from perceived punishments into a truly enriching curriculum for life. It's about learning to find peace and deep satisfaction, not just in getting everything we think we want.
But in wanting what we have learned to see as truly valuable through the lens of lived experience.
Exactly. Which prompts that cultural question for you, the listener. What kind of life, imbued with that profound calm and freedom, could you begin to build, starting today, if you consciously applied these principles?
So maybe as you go about your day to day, consider this. If the calm and freedom of old age is fundamentally about a conscious, intentional change in perspective, what small, maybe almost imperceptible perspective shift could you make today, right now? That would begin to unlock that profound freedom in your own life, regardless of your current age.
It's a powerful thought to end on.
The journey to wisdom isn't some distant destination you arrive at. It's a continuous unfolding transformation. And the beautiful truth is, you can choose to begin that transformation at any moment.